All right, welcome to The Explainer. Think of today's session as a first-year history lecture. We're going to jump right in and explore one of the most powerful and, frankly, most persistent story patterns in all of human history. A story ancient societies developed to solve a huge problem they all had to face.
And this is that problem. This is the fundamental question, right? It's both a political and a deep psychological puzzle. What happens when your authority figure is gone? When a king, a founder, or maybe even a god just disappears? How does a community not fall apart? How does it keep the social order intact?
So, here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to lay out exactly why death creates this crisis of authority. Then, we'll look at the brilliant narrative tool ancient cultures came up with to solve it. A big chunk of our time will be spent comparing two incredible examples head-to-head. After that, we'll see how this pattern evolved and wrap up by asking why it's still so compelling.
Okay, so let's really dig into the problem. When a powerful leader dies, it's so much more than a personal loss. It's a full-blown political crisis. Suddenly, the source of authority is gone. The line of succession might be a total mess, and the social glue that leader provided, it's in real danger of just coming undone.
And this is the absolute key insight. The stories we're going to look at, they don't try to pretend death isn't real. That's not the point. Their job is to domesticate it. They're like a narrative repair kit for society, a way to manage the chaos and give meaning to the loss, so the community can move forward.
So how in the world did these ancient societies pull off this narrative repair? Well, they came up with a really specific, and you'll see, a remarkably consistent kind of story to fix this exact problem. Let's take a look at the architecture of that solution.
This is our core concept for the day, the dying and rising narrative. You should think of it as a piece of symbolic technology. It's a story engineered to reframe the finality of death into just a temporary but necessary transition. It takes a moment of total loss and turns it into the very source of new power and authority.
And you see here, there's a clear four-step structure that pops up over and over again in all kinds of different cultures, from ancient Mesopotamia all the way to the Greco-Roman world. It always starts with a descent or a death. That's followed by a period of loss, of absence. Then you get the dramatic return, where the figure is changed, and it all culminates in a renewed and usually an even more powerful form of authority.
All right, now we get to the real heart of the matter. We're going to do a side-by-side comparison of our two main case studies. We're putting the Mesopotamian myth of the goddess Inanna right up against the Egyptian myth of the god Osiris, so we can see this narrative pattern play out in real time.
So, on one side, you've got Inanna. She's this incredibly powerful Mesopotamian goddess of love, but also of war. Her journey down into the underworld is directly tied to the agricultural cycles of fertility and harvest. And on the other side, you've got Osiris, the original god-king of Egypt, whose murder and resurrection are absolutely essential for maintaining cosmic order, and crucially, for guaranteeing life after death.
Okay, so this table really lays out the parallels beautifully. Let's just look at that first row, the death. For Inanna, it's not just death, it's total humiliation. She's stripped naked, killed, and hung on a meat hook. For Osiris, it's absolute chaos. He's betrayed, murdered, and hacked to pieces by his own brother. But now, jump down to that last row, the new authority. This is the crucial part. Neither one just goes back to their old job. Inanna's return proves she now has power over death itself, and Osiris, he becomes the lord of the underworld, guaranteeing order after death. You see, their authority isn't just back, it's fundamentally transformed and made even greater because of what they went through.
And that brings us to a really critical idea that develops in these stories. They're not just about surviving. They're about completely redefining what power even is. They perform this radical flip, this inversion of what authority looks like.
I mean, just think about what this quote is saying. It represents a massive psychological shift. A leader who has stared into the abyss, who's been to the land of the dead and back, well, they're seen as way more legitimate, way more powerful than someone who's never really been tested. Their authority is no longer just about winning battles. It's earned through enduring the absolute worst.
You can basically boil it all down to this simple, powerful formula. A ruler whose power has been forged in the fire of suffering, well, that kind of leader inspires a deep sense of loyalty. It's not just about obeying them because they're strong, it's about connecting with them on a moral level. It turns leadership into something the whole community can feel a part of. Now, a story pattern this powerful, it doesn't just vanish when empires fall. No way. It gets picked up, it gets adapted, and it gets repurposed with incredible efficiency. And that's exactly what happened with an emerging religion we now know as Christianity.
So what was the big innovation here? Well, the key was shifting the pattern from a circle to a straight line. You see, the earlier myths, like Inanna and Osiris, they were often tied to recurring cyclical things like the seasons and the harvest. But Christianity reframed the death and resurrection of its central figure, Jesus, as a one-time-only pivotal event that became the turning point for all of human history.
So the takeaway here is absolutely crucial. Christianity didn't invent a totally new symbolic language out of thin air. It took this ancient, powerful one and cranked it up to 11. It took that existing logic of power through suffering and pushed it to its most extreme conclusion, basically arguing that the most shameful form of Roman execution was actually the ultimate moral victory, a victory that turns the whole logic of earthly empires completely upside down.
Which brings us to our final question. Why? Why has this narrative held on for thousands of years, shaping entire civilizations all over the globe? What is it about this story of going down and coming back that gives it such incredible staying power?
At the end of the day, these stories last because they do something every human society desperately needs them to do. They provide a coherent answer to the sheer chaos of death and loss. They don't offer a scientific solution, they offer a narrative one. They make authority last longer than any one person, they hold a community together when things fall apart, and they make suffering just a little more bearable by framing it as part of a much bigger, meaningful story.
And that powerful sense of reassurance, well, it leads us to our final and pretty provocative question. Once a society has a story this fundamental, a myth that holds everything together, how does it protect that story? How does it enforce it? And that question, it shifts our focus away from the myth itself and onto the community that lives by it. And that, class, is a topic for our next lecture.